Seeing your presentation?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, we'll jump right into it. You know that this is the Public Lands Master Plan, Reimagine Nature. And I've had the pleasure as a consultant to help structure and guide the plan creation of how these components are coming together. And so I thought we'd start a little bit with a recap of what was in engagement window number 1 of how did we hear from constituents, and Nancy's Monteith from the city is going to also present with me on that aspect, sharing a lot of the how are the focus groups formed, how did they come together to provide some input in shaping the plan ideas. Nancy, do you want to kick in right there of sharing some of the previous work that's been done that's leading into shaping these ideas?
Sure. You know, when we were starting this project and a master plan, the opportunity to be able to be a part of shaping the future of public lands, creating a 20-year vision is really once in a generation opportunity. So we feel really lucky to be here now thinking about all the possibilities ahead of us. We worked with our civic engagement team to identify like a target number of how many people to reach. And the civic engagement team said that the gold standard for outreach was 10% of the adult population. So with a 200,000 population of the city, half are adults, we came up with a number of 10,000. And what you see here, this number of 7,000, those are 7,000 contacts. So some of that is double because we engaged with people in multiple ways. But we, at this very beginning, wanted to reach out and reach as many people as possible. So we had a digital survey, 4,500 people responded to that, including 635 of those survey responses were collected through in-person contacts in our parks and natural areas. And the thing that did is it really helped us ensure that our demographic response was also closer to the city's demographic. So we had the intercept surveys helped us reach a wider range of incomes, ages, ethnicities, and locations. Another thing to think about with this data is just from a statistical standpoint, the number of surveys that we got and information is considered representative for the community. And then the other thing I wanted to say is we really work closely with Design Workshop. They helped guide us and brought in a lot of new ideas to public lands to think about how to reach people. And we used yard signs in the parks. We had posters. We collaborated with the students and got posters hung in local businesses, did stencils on the ground. And I think it really, in the end, paid off. And right now we're, I think I'll turn it back over to Anna at that point.
Sure. And when Nancy mentions the goal of closer to 10,000, the 7,000 for just our first round, our first engagement window is really an impressive number. Prior to this, the thing we often leave out of this story that's really important to it as well is that there was a needs assessment that was conducted and completed in 2019. And that needs assessment included a statistically valid mail survey as well as online survey. And that gave us a lot of the preliminary thoughts into what was still yet to address. We knew a lot about what people said they needed, so we didn't have to ask a lot of questions on that basis. It's kind of your traditional, what kind of sports do you play? What kind of activities are you looking for? Do you feel your needs are being met type of survey. This effort and phase in this window was then to take what we learned from that and take a refresh on thinking to the future. So many of the questions were helping to align and understand values and bigger picture questions from people. So Nancy mentioned these various ways that we were engaged. I wondered, Nancy, do you want to hit a little bit about how the focus groups came together and how you organized those?
Yeah, so at the very beginning of the project, another goal that we had for engagement was really to build broad-based community support and endorsement of the plan. And we knew that will be a success to seeing the plan adopted and implemented. So right at the very beginning of the project, we identified over 200 organizations, and they that we in some way, either directly or indirectly, collaborate with. And those groups included, recreational leagues, nonprofits, community organizations such as the University Neighborhood Partners, arts groups such as Utah Arts Alliance and Sugar Space, Wasatch Community Gardens, groups that represent disability communities, environmental organizations, the Utah Museum of Natural History and the Jordan River Commission, and then bike and active transportation advocates. So we solicited their interest at the very beginning of the project, and also asked them what are their primary interests, what would they how involved would they like to be, and what aspects are they most interested in. So when we were coming back to the focus groups and thinking about how to test some of these ideas that Anna will share with you, we looked at the interests that were kind of articulated, and we divided the groups up into active, welcoming places, connected, accessible parks, environment, and stewardship. So we had those kind of three key themes, and we developed a series of groups for the external stakeholders, and then we kind of sent an invitation out and let people self-select which one they wanted to join. And although we had the same content for each one of the focus groups, what we really wanted to do is help bring groups with similar interests together, so you could see those kind of relationships build on each other in those focus groups. We had a total of 8 focus groups with external stakeholders and over 40 participants. And then we also did 6 internal stakeholder focus groups, and that included a focus group with each of our public lands divisions, so we can hear from our staff how they feel about the ideas, and all of that. And then we'll be taking this information as they respond to the big ideas and helping refine that. I think the other thing, the goal for the focus groups was really to advance the relationships between these organizations and with public lands. One thing that is becoming really apparent through all of this is that these ideas are really big. They're bigger than just public lands. And in order to be successful, it will require committed partnerships to achieve these lofty goals. But Anna?
Sure. I think one of the questions you had for us in this session today was how are we forming these big ideas? And I wanted to share for a minute kind of what went into this. So the plan's going to include many different elements to it. This structure is one we have in place right now to think about how they come together. And the big ideas, I've been representing that as just a way to express a vision. They help encapsulate it and share it in a tangible way with people. I don't think it's the limit of the vision. The vision is going to include many other things in this, these value lenses, as well as goals and strategies that relate to those goals that are far more that include many other aspects of policies, practices, and priorities under those goals, in addition to these 10 big ideas. But I think of them as an expression of the overall vision that helps people really relate to the plan. And so to create those 10, a bit of the magic to it was there's a number of efforts that we came to understand were underway or had been planned, or really would need a lot more to accomplish that had been thought about in the city to initialize that step. So the initial staff list, as well as reviewing previous plans, helped us get those thoughts into our head about what other big ideas are out there we want to build off of or join together in some way. And then with that, the needs assessment I mentioned was another key piece that came into this, looking at what people said they are looking for and most need for recreation and time outdoors. And then this last round of engagement, there were survey results, open-ended responses, stakeholder focus groups, Those are all lots of different points of contact, a lot of open-ended stuff that comments that we had to filter through and understand what those mean, how to relate those. And you can kind of see this coding system that we helped Nancy and her team deploy to think about how they're going to filter those different comments and sort through what came up as important. You know, with that, it's not like this is voting. It's not like we have some top pick here. It's not like it's a complete magical formula that comes out with your top things, but there are certain themes that seem to resonate with people that we can piece together to think about how these come together. Another part in it is, you know, buy-in from elected officials, those in leadership who need to be the champions of these plans and eventually adopted as well. So we've had a number of rounds of presentation to City Council, sometimes just making them aware of what the plan is about and what's going on. This last round, we've had briefings with just 2 at a time of council members to let them know about the ideas, but also to take a moment and understand if there are other things that are on their minds that they're seeing more globally that need to be brought into this. We're going to be continuing to work through how to express those 10 ideas. So it maybe was shared with you that these preliminary big ideas, likely before we release them to the public in the next round, we're going to have some adjustments and tweaks to them. We haven't reflected yet quite yet from the City Council meetings on any changes we need to do here. And the other aspect is we'll be meeting with staff at the city in different departments to understand if there's other ways we can communicate this. So these were the 10 big ideas, and I believe you've already reviewed these together. Is that right? Great.
Yeah, and I'm also attaching them here if people want to.
Oh, great.
Have them.
Anything else you want to know about their formation, how they came together, or know from us before we turn it back over to you all?
Yeah, let's see if people have questions. Maybe you have time for 1 or 2.
Yeah, did we get at all the things you were hoping we would talk about there, Yves?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Any questions from the students or from others? And yeah, I was attaching the preliminary report that you had, as well as I don't know if it's exactly this PowerPoint or very similar PowerPoint, in case people want to look at it.
Great.
Well, if there's no questions, thank you so much.
Sure.
Then we are going to hear from the students. I wanted to mention that actually the West Side Studio is one of the stakeholders. So this is how we connected. So very early in the summer, Nancy was saying, okay, what's their level of engagement? And I said, well, I like to involve my students. So I like what it was said before, that this is about long-term partnerships, and really stakeholders are people that are that have that interest and that influence to be involved in this long-term, because it's not only the planning, but the implementation of the plan is going to be very important as well. And also, Anna asked me how much the students know about this. They basically jump into this even before the classes started. We already have 2 stakeholder workshops that started, and they didn't even know what it was about. So they just went there and they did a great job listening. So I feel that was their primary job, to listen and to absorb some of the conversations that have been happening and just tell us today. So I have, and Anna, if you can stop sharing, thanks. We have here the presentation that they put together. It's just words, so very different to what Anna had. But it's more visual. Each team will have about 3 minutes to give their presentation, and I feel that things look a little bit different now on my end, but I will try to yeah, tell you if it's like about time. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I believe that you can move forward the slides because we are all sharing the slides. So let's try that with like the first presentation and see if like Che and Zach, if you are able to move the slides on your own.
Sorry, can you hear me? I apologize. My internet keeps going in and out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we hear
Okay,
you just
okay,
fine.
awesome.
And sometimes like turning off the video helps.
Wait, that should be fine. I'm ready
Okay.
to go. All
Yeah.
right. All right, so I'm Che Mosqueda. Zach and I attended the urban forestry meeting, and it was really interesting to see basically what all you guys have done with the Reimagine Nature SLC program. And a lot of the focus seemed to be on community engagement. And with that, there was about 5,000 or 4,500 surveys that had went out. And then you guys also did 2,320 pop-up events. And then there were 17 community presentations. And with that, there seemed to be a lot of basically interaction with getting the community involved in this process and helping them understand where the problem areas are and exactly what they're asking. And with that, on like the planning side, that the planners needed to be aware of any pre-existing problems and then how to address them, and then to help the communities understand those pre-existing problems and how they can be fixed. And then moving on into the next slide, for the green infrastructure, there was a lot of talk about how basically trail use is up, and a lot of the outdoor stuff, especially right now during COVID, is becoming very popular. And that one of the big things was getting trails and connecting green areas together so that people can go out and they can basically be, 5 minutes from a trail, 5 minutes from a park, from their home. And then there was some focus on the lack of the trees in the west side area, and basically how to address that, and then how to not leave out the east side as well as downtown. And then getting into adding more green space and having plants and different types of trees available as well to make it a little bit more diverse in that sense. And then moving on to the next slide for the different equity in parks. There's a big focus on increased access for everyone, and then empowering the communities. And one thing that I noted was that the word minority is used, that is a term that's used as a deficit. And that was a quote from the meeting. And I think that's really interesting, because if you take a look at how we view those communities, like what we learned in this meeting is that we need to listen to the community, that what they're saying, and we need to understand what basically they want and they need. And then we need to figure out how to follow through with that so that there is some trust in between the city and the different communities that the city is serving. And that's about it.
Excellent. That was wonderful. So let's like go to our next presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can share. And can you go to the next slide, please? Yes. Okay, so from our takeaway from the conversation in our stakeholder workshop, in the first place, we want to make sure that we can accommodate more potential people to achieve the higher level of equity. That's because in the first place, not a lot of people has had equitable access to the green space and the sustainable infrastructure space. So that's a reason. That's one of the takeaway from the conversation. And then in the second place, we want to create the better structure of natural areas. That's because because the natural areas are not equally distributed based on our understanding of the project and our takeaway from the conversation. And in the third place, we want to try to test the public responses to the improved transportation services, because we want to try to collect some survey data and try to make sure everybody have the majority of everybody can have the diverse opinions about how to move forward. Please go to next slide. And in addition, we have to initiate the better connection between the lake and the mountains and heighten the values of the stewardship livability. That's because sometimes the very limited connection between the lakes and the mountains cannot be feasible for some minority populations. And moreover, the sustainable uses and the protection of green spaces can be applied and utilized to maximize the usage of the related policies. That's because the combination of the sustainable uses and the related policy can help to move this project more deeply with more excellent insights. Please go to the next slide. And last but not least, and moreover, we have to preserve and highlight historical spaces. Moreover, we also have to provide more potential opportunity to learn about the cultural value, because each person from different cultural value and background will have different perspective on this project, and we can let them to hear their voices more clearly. And furthermore, we have to hold community events to enliven spaces to make the spaces more active and allow more participants to potentially engage in this project. And at the end, we also have to try our best to improve the communication and the public outreach to increase accessibility. That's because sometimes a limited or some misunderstanding between public and the stakeholder can possibly occur. So we try our best to get rid of them and try to remove them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Luis.
Thank you. Hi, so my name is Luis Garcia, and I and Jamie Cross and I, we attended the welcoming spaces on Thursday, January 21st. And one of the biggest takeaways from the meeting was community engagement, as mentioned in the previous slides. It brings the community together, which enhances safety, creates new opportunities that we may have overlooked, and opens our opportunities and options for resources. And to elaborate a little bit more, we think community engagement was one of the biggest one, considering the fact it attracts more people. You know, you always listen to, or you always hear that we hear you, and it attracts more people in terms of coming together, whether it be, you know, even a business, when they mention we hear you, like you just want to be engaged with that business a little bit more because they care about you. And that's what community engagement is all about. Our second slide, we did accessibility. It ensures that all community members can access the proposed projects, improves the usability for all members, and gives a sense of inclusion to all people involved. Again, in the first slide, we mentioned community engagement as in being able to be heard. Now, accessibility. After you hear all these proposed projects, it is very important to make sure that everyone who engaged in these surveys, these outreaches, are able to use the proposed projects that we came and planned. So that was one of the important second takeaways that we got from the meetings. And lastly, master plan process, which helps us achieve and successfully accomplish our end goal. Take community feedback into consideration, which would result in utilizing all resources to make it happen. Master plan process is another huge one that we wanted to mention due to the fact of, you know, you have to make sure you've got a plan in which will lead to our end goal, starting from the bottom, going all the way to the top. What can we do to help the community in terms of better quality of life? And we just want to make sure that everything is on track and, again, we accomplish our end goal. Thank you.
Hi, this is Sadika, and Justice and I joined the workshop Welcoming Space. So our first takeaway idea is integrated perks, safety, and awareness programs. Developing better signage in multiple languages will encourage people to come to the perks, and if we can make a beautiful web interface and some features available on internet that will help people get more engaged with perks, they will get to know about the perks, and there will be connection with perks. If you can connect perks with institutions like school for active learning, that will be a better approach. And integrating parks with adjoining land use areas through active transportation will be a great approach towards our more active approaches. And there comes the security concern. Can we keep our parks open late night if we think about the Sunnyvale Park? So this is our first takeaway point, and our second takeaway point was accessibility, patronage, and mental health opportunities. Increasing accessibility to park always reduce antisocial behavior and crime. For instance, if there was an example of China. In China, there are some the parks organizes a few programs that help kids to get involved in those social activities rather than get involved in antisocial behavior or crime. So in West Side, usually kids are not seen going for hiking or skiing. So if adults can help them through mentorship to go there, there will be more natural outdoor recreation activities there. So our third takeaway point was a green infrastructure in Salt Lake City. Conservation of biodiversity is always very important because it ensures healthy and green future. And in Salt Lake City's biodiversity, it consists of wetland ecosystem. So there is a correlation between wetland preservation with biodiversity, and protection of endangered native species in and around the lakes, including the birds, will be a great approach. And we can see the emerald ribbon in Salt Lake City. It's a great component of the biodiversity. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Now it's Jasmine or Austin. Thanks, Sadika. That was great.
Oh, it's my turn. Sorry there. Didn't realize how quick the presentations would be going. Can you scroll down? Did I share my screen or?
Well, I'm using mine. Yeah.
Oh, right.
So we
sorry.
have here the first one, collaborations and partnerships.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Our presentation, it is about the environment and stewardship workshop presentation. And there were 3 main takeaway points from that. So one of them is collaboration and partnerships. So what that means is that we discussed about like overlapping within various projects and goals that would create opportunities to collaborate, divide and conquer, or to add more resources to make sure that projects move forward with their agendas and goals. The other point about collaboration and partnerships was to collaborate across different scales, which could mean age, location, organizations. So like get more people involved in the projects. And we were also thinking about using collaboration as a resource to accumulate knowledge, increase outreach, and to create inclusive decisions so that no one will be left out in the discussions that go around in the projects. And for, so the second takeaway point of the presentation was access and connectivity. So what we were discussing was that geography, environmental degradation, human activity and behavior and resource availability all had an impact on access and connectivity with like natural spaces, green spaces, or like how people access those spaces or they find them welcoming or safe or inclusive. So with that, we talked about like education, how education, communication, and outreach are essential for like people to access those green spaces and to connect with nature. And then we were thinking about strategically increasing connectivity to the natural areas, the biodiversity hotspots, and the Great Salt Lake to engage with communities, in particular on the west side, and to shift perceptions about nature while protecting the natural resources and habitats of those green spaces. And I'd like to point out our third main takeaway point, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion, where we were trying to define and identify like important characteristics of equity, diversity, and inclusion so that communities would have a clear understanding and expectations when they visit the natural spaces. And we were also trying to understand like the needs of like local neighborhoods and acknowledge like the stories, culture, and heritage of our communities and to address the barriers of equity and access to the natural spaces. And then we were considering how geographic disparities like regarding access to natural open spaces and different environments and communities and like what are the factors behind them. And last but not least, we were having conversations about equity that focus around sustainability issues and how they must be held in safe and diverse environments. So that was our presentation for the workshop.
Hi, I'm Morgan Julian. Virgil London and I attended the general stakeholder workshop presentation. We had a pretty unique situation where we only had one guest joining us for this presentation, Gilberto Rejon Megana, who is the founder of Heartland Community for Youth and Families. So our first takeaway was connecting with small nonprofits. Heartland Community for Youth and Families is a small nonprofit that helps youth with education and connecting them in the environment. So connecting with small nonprofits will help connect with the community because these small nonprofit communities already have put in a lot of effort and time into the communities that they work in. So they already have that trust and that faith. So being able to utilize that resource is a huge benefit for any project. Our second takeaway is the after-school programming and funding. So investment in our youth is an investment in the future. It's a full circle effect. So we must teach our kids how to take care of the land and appreciate it so that they can grow up and teach their kids how to take care of the land and appreciate it as well. Programs are most effective though when they come from the school directly. And then our third takeaway is connecting the public access with underrepresented people. So investing in areas that have underrepresented communities to create safer, cleaner, and public areas in these communities, as well as creating access for outdoor education and creating access for those who don't necessarily have a lot of access.
Right. Hi, my name is Brandon Syracuse, and I attended the Connected and Accessible Parks workshop with my classmate Claudia. And here's a little bit about what we heard. So our first main takeaway was centered around universal access and proximity to parks. Specifically, there's concerns about how we need to consider accessibility both to and from public lands as well as within our public lands. A point brought up by a couple of people was that we want everyone in Salt Lake City to be within 5 minutes of a park, and not just by driving, but by walking and bicycling ideally, because nobody should necessarily have to get into a car and drive somewhere just to access public lands. And a concern that was brought up specifically was trails access near the University of Utah and the East Bench. What happens a lot of times in that part of the city is that there's parking issues in the neighborhoods because a lot of it is like residential permit only. And that can really limit access to only people that live on the east side instead of making the trails more of a regional amenity. Some people also brought up the topic of using our public spaces such as trails to connect people to different destinations, such as using trails to get kids to and from school. And then people also talked about prioritizing walking and bicycling using good design of our infrastructures. Specifically, a couple of people mentioned that we should consider trails in Salt Lake City as transportation routes and not just recreational facilities. And this would be something that would help make sure the city is friendly for walking and bicycling. And then finally, if we're talking about connectivity to public spaces and public lands, physical connections are obviously very visible and important, but somebody mentioned that emotional and cultural connections are just as important. So advocating for like a broader definition of what connectivity means in the context of public lands. I'll go to the next slide, please. So our second main takeaway centers around equitable and accessible stewardship opportunities. Some people expressed a desire to have more stewardship opportunities for people with different abilities, ages, and backgrounds, and especially if we're providing opportunities for people with disabilities, making sure that we're giving them options on what to do rather than telling them what they can and can't do if they're volunteering. Some people brought up this idea of friends of groups for parks. They're basically neighborhood organizations that advocate for stewardship of individual neighborhood parks. And there's a few of these organizations on the east side, but there are currently 0 on the west side. So perhaps getting 1 or 2 of those at least set up on the west side would be a good idea to help increase stewardship of the wonderful public spaces on that side of the city. And then also getting businesses involved in stewardship of public lands would be good as well, because what happens a lot of times is businesses benefit from being located near parks, but they don't necessarily give back to the parks in the ways that we might like them to. So setting up a day of service or something like that where businesses can participate in stewardship could be really helpful. Then the next slide, please. Thank you. Our last main takeaway centers around the urban forest, preserving what we have and revitalizing it for the future. And so a lot of people brought up the fact that we did lose a lot of trees in the windstorm last fall. And while that was unfortunate, some trees have been replaced, not as many as maybe some people had hoped. And some people suggested collaborating with Tree Utah to help plant trees, replant trees that were downed in the windstorms, and also planting new trees, particularly in places where there isn't as much of a canopy, such as Rose Park and Glendale. And also in general, just more green spaces would help in dense built out areas of the city, such as downtown. So things like pocket parks and rain gardens and street trees, anything like that in really dense areas of the city would go a long way in terms of making sure there aren't any gaps in the urban canopy. And that's what I have for you. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Izzy Fuller, and I attended the Environment and Stewardship Workshop on Friday, January 29th with Shamali. The first main overarching takeaway we observed was focused on volunteering and involvement from the community in their green spaces. Residents want ways to be involved, and there is a desire to increase opportunities that cultivate and activate the love that residents have for their community and surroundings. Additionally, while some residents want more green space, some stakeholders recognize the opportunity to connect people to resources that already exist around them that they may not realize exist or fully appreciate yet. In addition to increasing awareness of the spaces available to them, there's also interest in increased awareness surrounding public events. And stakeholders mentioned a goal of making training programs for things like gardening, stewardship, and education more accessible to minorities, including socioeconomic minorities. Next slide, please. The second main takeaway is an interest in the utilization of collaborations and partnerships with different groups and organizations in the community. Several considerations that were discussed regarding relationships included potential public-private partnerships to create and make the best use of open spaces, using aging buildings for affordable housing, and creating partnerships with organizations that promote opportunities for underrepresented and marginalized communities. One example that was brought up was creating parks or community spaces by utilizing LDS church properties that had closed. Next slide, please. The final key takeaway is an understanding that science can contribute to better outcomes. Data and tools such as GIS can be used to determine the most productive and equitable lands to acquire and use in community projects or green spaces. Data can be used to visualize the character of the urban forest, and some of the data that used can be generated through citizen science, a part of the volunteering and community involvement I mentioned a few slides back. Taking a scientific approach using data and research can help address situations that could contribute to gentrification. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Taylor. Eric attended the golf division staff meeting this past Monday. Golf actually wasn't originally in our master plan, so it's really nice to have those guys connected with us. Could you hit on the next slide? Okay. So our first takeaway is increase of existing public access. So there was talk of combining Glendale and Rose Park, access trails, how we can connect these to all of the green spaces. That touches on our big idea number 5, the Emerald Ribbon, and 9, connecting all our green space assets together. And so the public actually has a lot more access than I think they're aware of. This actually was a very interesting conversation because I think a lot of this in terms of golf just needs to be connecting the park users to this information because there's a lot out there. There are a lot of trails already in place. And so we just kind of want to compound on that. And that also increases the cafes, the patios and concessions. We want to sort of implement more infrastructure that's there so that we want to bring more public that sees that is a viable space to use and that they want to join in that space. There was talk of definitely like rehabilitating some structures that are already there and how there are wonderful views in a lot of these golf courses. And so we want those to be open and accessible to people. Next is our natural areas. So we're also trying to increase the tree count and coverage here. That touches on idea number 8, promoting our urban forest. And so we don't have a very good age mix of trees in these golf courses. A lot of them are a lot older. Many of the trees are dead. And it's actually interesting because the trees on golf courses aren't considered urban forestry unless they grow into like off the course and kind of into private areas. And so urban forestry is a long-term plan that right now doesn't include the maintenance of trees on golf courses. So we don't have a lot of those younger trees that'll help increase with our biodiversity. And then we don't currently have ways to remove those older trees as well. And then for number 3, we want to expand the public access as much as we can, open more cart trails, connect these golf courses all together. And so we're also thinking about mitigating safety concerns. So it's not just how can we invite more people to use these spaces, but how can we invite them to use these spaces in ways that make sense. And so clearly we're going to need to have people know where they need to go, what they need to expect if they're wanting to mitigate safety hazards while people are also using the golf course. And that's it.
Hi, my name is Anissa. I worked with Amy on this meeting. So we attended on Monday, February 1st at 12 to 1:30, and it's Parks Division staff. So our first main taker was a possibility of tagging. Yeah, so it was discussed that tagging was a worried problem so adding like maintenance of adding new signage trails, sorry, okay. Older signage has been getting tagged a lot. However, if Vinley wrapped is used to clean, which is an investment, but it does in the long run save money and time and work. So deterrence of tagging, increasing a traffic of people using space, adding a blank canvas, well, which like it kind of decreases the possibility of people tagging if you have a blank wall somewhere in the park. Another one was signage, adding correct and sufficient signage. If adding ideas from Big Ten signage, we must accompany it to make it a workable and viable option. People are always having a hard time finding trails or signage for trails. So if we make it easier to find a more reliable availability, it should help with guests not being confused. Oh, sorry, can you go back? I wrote one, but it's not there. I must have like wrote it on a different place. Can I share my screen instead on this one?
You can just like tell us what it is.
Okay.
That'd be easier.
It's in the third one is enhancing biodiversity, like adding more trees that are different ages so that it's more sustainable and increases the urban forest in the future, and bringing pollinators habitat to have a better manage in our landscapes into the future was also the last one.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Mcdonald. I was in attendance of the workshop that occurred this morning with Parks Division staff. This workshop was a very lively discussion on what spaces used to be and how they've changed over time in relation to those types of people that have used them and the challenges that have come along with that and where expansion needs to happen. A big example would be creating a Liberty Park for West Side residents and giving them an option to utilize that space rather than having to travel to the east side, as well as redesigning our more dated spaces, bringing them more updated in the anemones that are involved with them. 3 highlights of this discussion include maintenance and repairs. Currently, our maintenance crews are overwhelmed with their low numbers and responsibilities of what they have to deal with as a whole, that if it wasn't for the COVID-19 pandemic, they would be still struggling to be maintaining our parks and open spaces as they are now, with more people using them throughout this pandemic. There is a lack of volunteers and seasonal and hourly employees, so there has been a call to somehow increase those numbers in some sense, as well as when landscaping and choosing maintenance, more specific vegetation that isn't a drain on their resources, and designing these spaces in a sense to where we're not returning in the spring and increasing our resources and repairing the damage to the grass and to the equipment and to the sidewalks because it wasn't dealt with during the winter, just getting the snow removal out of the way. A second highlight would be creating more intimate spaces. When looking at the damage that windstorms do to vegetation and trees and the removal as they age over time, it was noted that it's important to look at species and diversity in appearance and imagine how they're going to mature over time. Think of an open space as being overwhelming in its uses, and think of how the use of trees, chairs, benches, tables create more intimate, personal spaces where one can become more connected with each other, more connected with the space, and not feel like they're just out in the open with all these people. And it's important that when you choose your vegetation and you choose your resources, that you consider the long term of how it's going to mature and grow and shape into that vision. And the third highlight of this discussion was accessibility and the sense of having adequate parking to encourage the use of residents, along with an interconnected sidewalks from the street and throughout the space, and an increase and better design of street site exposure. There are some spaces that are kind of tucked away off the street, noticeability is low because of that, and basically removing perimeter vegetation that's not only a maintenance issue and does put a drain on those resources, but also creates this closed off, less inviting feeling of having this barrier between you and this space. Ultimately, the whole goal is for you to enjoy